I beg you as a youth, I want to say these days, please don't judge me, but I've got a confession. I believe that most of the ills that I address in this book, the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, can be engaged if not relieved if we, yes, we read Baldwin and scores of really smart black intellectuals, including Robert D.G. Kelly, Farah Jasmine Griffin, and if we elect good politicians like Kamala Harris. Let's go. Harris Biden 2020. Listen, we get music. Damn, I just sucked my zigzags. But I don't even fuck with zigzags anyway. Might as well throw it out. I beg you as a youth who wants to say these days, please don't judge me, but I've got a confession. You know what? In the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King, let me skim through some of the portions of the last chapter of The Days to Come. I'm not going to get to the whole chapter, but I had bookmarked some pages. I'm just going to read the lines. Like, the book is a great one, so here it goes. On page 117, he wrote, as one approaches the emancipation of today's Negro from all those traumatic ties that still bind him to slavery other than the physical, these shattered footnotes, this half-forgotten history of a system that bartered dignity for dollars, stands as a painful reminder for the capacity of society to remain complicit in the midst of injustice. Page 118. Moreover, he is asking the Negro to accept half the loaf and to pay for that half by waiting willingly for the other half to be distributed in crumbs over a hard and protracted winter of injustice. Page 119. We need a powerful sense of determination to banish the ugly blemish of racism scarring the image of America. We can, of course, try to temporize, negotiate small, inadequate changes, and prolong the timetable of freedom in the hopes that the narcotics of delay will dull the pain of progress. Oh my God. Yo, this man said though, he said, of course, we can, of course, try to temporize, negotiate small inadequate changes, and prolong the timetable of freedom in the hopes that the narcotics of delay will dull the pain of progress. Dr. King a fool for that one. I ain't even gonna lie, man. Martin, you was a fool for that one, Martin. As the kids wants to say today, Martin, you was a fool for that one, brother. Something else I'm looking for. Did I bookmark it for later? Man, this man went in. This man says, someone once wrote, this is on page 123, when you are right, you cannot be too radical. When you are wrong, you cannot be too conservative. Yeah, my ideas are not too radical, yeah. It just seems that way because it requires consistent work, you know what I mean? And on page 127 it says, no amount of gold could provide an adequate compensation for the exploitation and humiliation of the Negro in America down through the centuries. I found what I was just looking for. It's on page 128, but I'm going to skip it and come back to it because I want to read that last from this book. But on to page 129 though. He says, those lost generations have never learned basic social skills on a functional level. The skills of reading, writing, arithmetic, of applying for jobs, of exercising the rights of citizenship, including the right to vote. On page 131, he says, nevertheless, a deeply entrenched social force, convinced that it need yield nothing of substantial importance, continues to dominate Southern life. And even in the North, the will to preserve the status quo maintains a rock-like hardness underneath the cosmetic surface. On page 133, he says, perhaps the most determining factor in the role of the federal government is the tone set by the chief executive in his words and his actions. Twitch much, collude much. Dr. King didn't say those words, I said those. On page 135, I think this is the last of it. I think this is the last one before I go back. Okay. He says on page 135, we were all involved in the death of John Kennedy. We tolerated hate. We tolerated the sick stimulation of violence in all walks of life. And we tolerated the differential application of law, which said that a man's life was sacred only if we agreed with his views. This may explain the cascading grief that flooded the country in late November. We mourned a man who had become the pride of the nation, when we grieved as well for ourselves because we knew we were sick. He was speaking of all Americans there, you know. The next page he says, White South was splitting, and that progress could be furthered by driving a wedge between the rigid segregationists and the new white elements whose love of the land was stronger than the grip of old habits and customs. And on page 139 he says, the Negro potential for political power is now substantial. That was only when we had 20 million African Americans in America. Now we got about 15 million. The Negroes are strategically situated in large cities, especially in the North but also in the South. And these cities in turn are decisive in state elections. But yeah, the quote that I wanted to not to close with though, from Dr. King's Why We Can't Wait, it's a great read. Pick it up. You will absolutely love it. You will absolutely love it, y'all. It is a beautiful read. It is on page 128. It speaks to our readiness as a community on a collective level. It speaks to our readiness in 63 and 64 when this book was published, and our readiness now in 2018. And our readiness really in the last 20 years. You know what I mean? And the quote is this: change in human psychology is normally a slow process, but it is safe to predict that when a people is ready for change, as the Negro has shown himself ready today, the response is bound to be rapid and constructive. If at any point up to this point you think I've been wrong about anything I've been asking for, reading and voting for 50 years to start, Dr. King himself just said it. If you think I'm more, you can't say Dr. King more. You can't say that. Like, if you black in America now, I'm going to tell y'all, man. Like Nick Cannon said on that little MLK special that they had, every black household had two pictures. What did Nick Cannon say? A picture of Jesus and Dr. King, right? Yeah, it was probably a joke, but yeah. So you can say Obama is wrong by anything, but when you say Dr. King said something, that's usually right? I mean, I'm just saying. So these are Dr. King's words now. He says, change in human psychology is normally a slow process. I'm asking for 50 years. But it is safe to predict, and I am safely predicting, that when the people is ready for change, as the Negro has shown himself ready today, can we show ourselves ready on November the 6th? And just continue. Twice a year. I can't say just once a year. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm asking you to vote in the primaries and then in the general. Twice a year. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you, say, oh, like people say, all you do is vote one time. Yes, I get it. It's every year. It's once a year now. You got 365 days in the year. 366 every 4 years. Okay. Every 4 years, you got 364 more days to do whatever the heck you want to do, except for those two days. And every 3 years, every year for 3 years in a row, you get 363 days. You can do whatever else you want, but just 2 days. Go stand and go vote. You can even mail in your vote before that, early voting. Like, just stay on top of it. You will know what's going on with it. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm asking. Please, man. Like, don't do it for me. Do it for your community. Do it for yourself. Honestly, that shit count. That motherfucker count. The only reason Russia was successful in helping this motherfucker become president was because they know it wasn't going to be a black turnout. It was already enough brainwashed to Obama-hating seeds that had been planted in our minds already. There are people who did not give a fuck about Hillary Clinton. It's not that they didn't like Hillary. They just didn't care. They were just tired of her. They just didn't care for her. You know what I mean? And I get it. Like, everything happened how it's supposed to happen. You know what I mean? Like, people that know me from the time Trump came out running, especially on the East Coast in the DMV, I never thought Trump was going to be president. I swore to the night of the election night, I still didn't, even to the next day. That's why my mind is stuck to them Obama days still. I'm sorry, I can't help it. You know what I mean? I digress though. Change in human psychology is normally a slow process, but it is safe to predict that when the people is ready for change, as a Negro should show himself to be ready today or herself, the response is bound to be rapid and constructive. You want to put the fear of God into white supremacy? Pick up a book and read, and pick up a ballot and vote. They would never see that shit coming, and they can't do nothing about it. This is now 50 years ago where they can say, no, you can't read, or no, you can't vote. They're going to try to say you can, but they can't tell you you can't. Think about it, y'all. The one thing that they cannot tell us we can't do anymore, that's the one thing we don't do. Yes, something they can never take away. We got something they can never take away. And it's the fire. It's the fire. That's why I love Bob, yo. So I tell you, man. Bob said that shit like it was. And yeah, the CIA did not kill Bob Marley. I need to cut that shit out. CIA, I know you was coming and say that shit might be possible, but come on, bro. Like, I get it. I get how the argument can be made. Bob Marley, who he was, but the CIA couldn't kill Bob Marley if they wanted to. Maybe they tried to recruit him, you know what I mean, because of his position they garnered, but they couldn't kill Bob Marley if they wanted to. Yes, you think they could have, the CIA can kill anybody. They killed Patrice Lumumba, they tried with their guy. I'm just saying they couldn't kill Bob Marley if they wanted to. Bob Marley died because of a genetic condition, because his father was Caucasian. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Now I'm trying to clean up my Arizona spill. My bad, yeah. It's distracting me. My OCD is fucking with me now. What's up, Felix? I used to stay tell me, Alpha, you OCD and shit. Get out of here, man. The OCD shit. I used to try to deny that shit though. But I picked up the paper the other day, and I want to touch on something my boy David Lazarus wrote, and his title is from the LA Times from Friday, October the 19th, and his title Dumb Trump pushes. He didn't say dumb Trump. He said Trump pushes for prizes in TV drug ads. Fat chance. By David Lazarus. The Trump administration told the drug industry this week that it wants the prices of prescription medication included in TV ads. The drug company said no. I could end this column right here. But why let either side of the hook? For all of President Donald Trump's bluster about drug companies' scandalous behavior, he says they're getting away with murder. He's largely tiptoed around the well-heeled generous to Republicans industry. Trump hasn't announced a single meaningful move to address runaway drug prices. Drug companies, for their part, keep testing what price points the market will bear and then pushing even higher. As it turns out, pharmaceutical companies are among the biggest beneficiaries of Trump's tax cuts, pocketing a windfall of billions of dollars and using the money not to reduce patients' medical expenses, but to enrich shareholders through stock buybacks. The tax policy advocacy group Americans for Tax Fairness estimated in a recent report that 5 of the biggest drug companies will save a combined $6.3 billion this year as a result of lower taxes, and 10 of the leading drug makers will enjoy a $76 billion tax break on offshore profits. And you telling me like these people are hurting for money? Go ahead, man. Hey, LeBron is a Laker now, man. I can have his picture. For everybody who knows me to be a Kobe fan and an original LeBron hater, I'm just saying, man, y'all already know, you know what I mean? Y'all remember how y'all used to ask me, oh, what if Kobe left the LA, went to another team, and I used to say Kobe wasn't going nowhere, and I told y'all, oh, even if he left, I was still going to be a Laker fan, but I'll be a fan of Kobe anyway, you know what I mean? But still, LeBron a Laker now, so I can, yeah, you know what I mean? What's up, Bron? Yo. Thanks for injecting what you're injecting in that team, man. You know what I mean? Like, I know the suspensions were handed down, but I ain't mad at it. I ain't mad at it, man. You know what I mean? B.I. gonna come back like, oh, give me that ball. And B.I., you need to stop playing above the rim, though. A little bit more above the rim. Stop jumping the trampoline for a little bit. Like, before every game, jumping the trampoline. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just fucking with you, bro. Low ceiling. The tax policy advocacy group Americans for Tax Fairness estimated in a recent report that 5 of the biggest drug companies will save a combined $6.3 billion this year as a result of lower taxes, and 10 of the leading drug makers will enjoy a $76 billion tax break on offshore profits. And contrary to trickle-down claims that the huge tax cuts will benefit the employees of these pharmaceutical giants, evidence so far shows that companies are sharing relatively little with their workers, the report found. But drug companies don't want people to think they're just a bunch of greedy, unfeeling bloodsuckers. So they told the White House that even though they won't put prices in their TV ads, they're willing to create a website and post drug prices there. A whole website? Drug companies patted themselves on the back for being such stand-up guys. The administration and Congress have called on our industry to provide cost information in direct-to-consumer advertisement, and our members are voluntarily stepping up to the plate, says Stephen J. Obel, President of Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, a trade group. This website thing won't be easy, he declared. Today's announcement represents a big change for our company, and it will require significant operational change for individual companies to implement, Obel said. But we believe this is the right thing to do, and this is an important step towards providing patients with the information they want. Meanwhile, back in the real world, a recent review of brand name prescription drug prices by the Associated Press found that over the first 7 months of the year, there were 96 price hikes for every announcement of a reduced. In the first 7 months of this year, from January to July of this year, every time the drug companies announce a price reduction, 96 prices on other drugs went up. Businesses is now losing money, man. Y'all need to cut that shit out. Like, stop feeling sorry for businesses. Yes, they're still gonna need to hire people because people make the business for better or for worse, you know what I mean? Businesses have taken the power out of people's hands that people used to have in their hands like maybe 40, 50, 60 years ago. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, man, like, it used to be like that. It used to be people power, yes. But there's been a generational shift, and there's a lack of generational collective ignorance that's holding people back from doing things on a collective level against big giants, multinational corporations, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry, man, I'm sorry. I can't help it. Can't help it. Alright. That's enough of David Lazarus. On that same paper, there was an editorial from the Associated Press that was titled "The Poor Left Behind by Job Growth," and it reads, "When cities benefit from hiring booms, gains often bypass residents born into poverty," study finds. And who's born into poverty? Who? You know what's so funny? I just realized something, yo. The only majority number black folks occupy in this country, we're considered minorities all the time, and we are minority population-wise. The only majority that we are is when it comes to people born into poverty in America. That's white supremacy in action right there, yeah. Make America great, motherfucker. What up, Trump? What's going on, man? You ain't get your tweeting yet? I'm sure you guys probably trying. You guys probably beating off or something. Melanie did not come to bed last night. She's still mad about that T.I. video. What up, Mr. Harris? You still got black immigrants ethnically self-hating against you? I feel your pain, bro. I have Africans tell me sometimes that I'm brainwashed too, because I take the side of African Americans when they're having a discussion about something, you know what I mean? I'm just saying. Like, that distinction is sadly there. I'm not the one making that distinction is sadly there. And if you're still denying in your heart that that's not right, maybe you don't feel like that, but yeah, you know there's some validity to what I'm saying, but I digress. Back to the article. A healthy dose of job growth has long been seen as a likely cure for poverty. But new research suggests that poor Americans are frequently left behind even when their cities or communities benefit from hiring booms. When cities such as Charlotte, North Carolina and Atlanta enjoyed a job surge in the 20 years that began in 1990, for example, the job gains mostly bypassed residents, often African Americans who had been born into poverty. That is among the findings of a study led by Raj Chetty, a Harvard economist whose newly launched Opportunity Atlas found no association between job growth and economic mobility for poor residents of the affected areas. Job growth is not sufficient by itself to create upward mobility, Chetty said. It's almost as though racial disparity have been amplified by job growth. His findings challenge much of the conventional thinking of government officials, business executives, and economists. That job gains are the surest way to lift up people in impoverished communities. President Dumpchuk has pledged to save neglected towns through jobs. His Democratic rival in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton, asserted that government investment to foster hiring will help create an economy that works for everyone. Governors and mayors have traded tax breaks for pledges by companies to create jobs in distressed communities. But Chetty and his colleagues, whose atlas examined communities down to census tract levels, found that economic mobility hinges more frequently on other factors. A person's race, for example, plays a pivotal role. Economic mobility varied widely among people of different races who live in the same neighborhoods in Los Angeles or Houston, among other places. Additionally, living in neighborhoods with many two-parent families improves the likelihood of emerging from poverty, even when someone was raised by a single parent. Mobility is often greater for children who come from neighborhoods with higher priced housing, and it's generally better when a higher proportion of adults in a community in a neighborhood are working, according to the analysis by Chetty. Economists Nathaniel Hendon of Harvard and John Friedman of Brown University, and researchers Sonia Potter and Maggie Johnson of the Census Bureau. In the 2 decades that ended in 2010, the Charlotte and Atlanta areas were flooded with jobs, but many of the people hired were moved to these areas. So people from poor neighborhoods essentially got cut out of the boom. Companies will rather attract non-black talent than encourage the talents that's in those communities to take those jobs. I'm just saying. They would. 9 times out of 10, that's why I get the animosity towards by the African American towards immigrants. You know what I mean? I get it because those companies poach those most likely immigrants or whites and especially Asians from other places. You know what I mean? Like I get it. So. Metro Pittsburgh, on the other hand, lost jobs between 1990 and 2010. Yet its residents' economic mobility improved as the area became a nexus for college graduates working in technology and healthcare. In the Seattle area, the home of such corporate powerhouses as Amazon and Microsoft, jobs and economic mobility both grew over the same period. These gains have in turn caused house prices to jump to levels that could threaten continued economic mobility. Disparities exist not just among metro areas, but also among neighborhoods within the same city, according to an Associated Press examination of the data in the Opportunity Atlas. In Baltimore, the Old Town neighborhood near Johns Hopkins Hospital is a mecca of entrepreneurship. A number of jobs there surged 21% between 2004 and 2013, compared with job growth of just 3.4% nationally. Yet the neighborhood, which has a 93% non-white population, is marked by abandoned storefronts and public housing. More than half of its residents live in poverty. You know what, man? If all that right there don't make you want to go vote, especially in Atlanta, if you live in Georgia and you don't go make sure that Stacey Abrams becomes the next governor of Georgia, like, yo, like really? If you don't do that, yo, that's a problem, man. You can't even be mad about nothing. Oh yeah, I forgot. Hey, Volkan, V-O-L-K-N, Malkov of Los Angeles, California, 90034. Thank you very much. It was my money order that you found that time outside of that Bank of America and mailed it in, you know what I mean? God bless you, brother. I said I'm glad that I actually it restored my belief in humanity. I'll forever save this, yo. I'll forever save this damn envelope. Yeah. And my landlord, thank you too. That was a portion of my rent. You know what I mean? Done today now. A lot of people. Let me go back to Nelson Mandela real quick, man. Let me get with my boy real quick. What's up, Nelson? We have finished. Oh, had we finished it? No, we hadn't finished it. We had stopped at chapter 95. On to 96. The meeting with the committee continued, and we stalled on the same issues that had prevented us from moving forward: the armed struggle, the Communist Party, and majority rule. I was still pressing coercive for a meeting with P.W. Botha. At this time, the authorities permitted me to have rudimentary communication with my comrades at Portsmouth and Robbins Island, and also the ANC in Lusaka. Although I knew I was going ahead of my colleagues, I did not want to go too far and find that I was all alone. In January 1989, I was visited by my 4 comrades from Portsmouth, and we discussed the memorandum I was planning to send to the state president. He reiterated most of the points I had made in our secret committee meetings, but I wanted to make sure the state president had them directly from me. He would see that we were not wild-eyed terrorists but reasonable men. I am disturbed, I wrote to Mr. Botha in the memorandum sent to him in March, as many other South Africans no doubt are, by the specter of a South Africa split into 2 hostile camps, blacks on one side and whites on the other, slaughtering one another. To avert this and prepare the groundwork for negotiations, I proposed to deal with the 3 demands made of the INC by the government as a precondition to negotiation: renouncing violence, breaking with the South African Communist Party, and abandoning the call for majority rule. On the question of violence, I wrote that the refusal of the ANC to renounce violence was not the problem. The truth is that the government is not yet ready for the sharing of political power with blacks. I explained our unwillingness to cast aside the Communist Party, and we reiterated that we were not under its control. Which man of honor, I wrote, will desert a lifelong friend at the insistence of a common opportunity and still retain the measure of credibility with his people? I said the rejection of majority rule by the government was a poorly disguised as attempts to preserve power. I suggested he must face reality. Majority rule and internal peace are like the 2 sides of a single coin. And while South Africa simply has to accept that there will never be peace and stability in this country unless the principle is fully applied. At the end of the letter, I offered a very rough framework for negotiation. 2 political issues will have to be addressed. Firstly, the demand for majority rule in a unitary state. Secondly, the concern of white South Africa over this demand, as well as the insistence of whites on structural guarantees that majority rule will not mean domination of the white minority by blacks. The most crucial task which will face the government and the ANC will be to reconcile these 2 positions. I propose that this be done in 2 stages. The first being a discussion to create the proper conditions for negotiation, the second being the actual negotiations themselves. I must point out that the move I have taken provides you the opportunity to overcome the current deadlock and to normalize the country's political situation. I hope you will seize it without delay. But delay there was. In January, P.W. Botha suffered a stroke. While it did not incapacitate the president, it did weaken him, and according to his cabinet, made him even more irascible. In February, Botha unexpectedly resigned as head of the party, but kept his position as state president. This was an unparalleled situation in the country's history. In the South African parliamentary system, the leader of the majority party becomes the head of state. President Botha was now head of state, but not of his own party. Some saw this as a positive development, that Botha wanted to be above party politics in order to bring about true change in South Africa. Political violence and international pressure both continued to intensify. Political detainees all across the country had held a powerful hunger strike, persuading the Minister of Law and Order to release over 900 detainees. In 1989, the UDF formed an alliance with the Congress of South African Trade Union, COSATU, to form the Mass Democratic Movement, MDM, which then began organizing a countrywide defiance campaign of civil disobedience to challenge apartheid institutions. On the international front, Oliver Tambo held talks with the government of Great Britain and the Soviet Union, and in January 1987 met the U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz in Washington. The Americans recognized the ANC as an indispensable element of any solution in South Africa. Sanctions against South Africa remained in force and even increased. Political violence also had its tragic side. As the violence in Soweto intensified, my wife permitted a group of young men to act as her bodyguards as she moved around at the township. These young men were untrained and undisciplined and became involved in activities that were unbecoming of a liberation struggle. Winnie subsequently became legally entangled in the trial of one of her bodyguards who was convicted of murdering a young comrade. This situation was deeply disconcerting to me, for such a scandal only served to divide the movement at a time when unity was essential. I wholly supported my wife and maintained that while she had shown poor judgment, she was innocent of any serious charges. That July, for my 71st birthday, I was visited at the cottage by Victor Vester by nearly my entire family. It was the first time I had ever had my wife and children and grandchildren all in one place, and it was a grand and happy occasion. Once Officer Swart outdid himself in preparing the feast, and he did not even get upset when I let some of the grandchildren eat their puddings before their main courses. After the meal, the grandchildren went into my bedroom to watch a video of a horror movie while the adults stayed outside gossiping in the lounge. It was a deep, deep pleasure to have my whole family around me, and the only pain was the knowledge that I had missed such occasions for so many years. On July the 4th, I was visited by General William C., who informed me that I was being taken to see President Botha the following day. He had described the visit as a courtesy call, and I was told to be ready to leave at 5:30 a.m. I told the general that while I was looking forward to the meeting, I thought I ought to have a suit and tie in which to see Mr. Botha. The suits from the visit of the eminent persons group had long since vanished. The general agreed, and a short while later a tailor appeared to take my measurements. That afternoon I received a new suit, tie, shirt and shoes. Before leaving, the general also asked me my blood type just in case anything untoward should happen the following day. I prepared as best I could for the meeting. I reviewed my memo and the extensive notes I had made for it. I looked at as many newspapers and publications as I could to make sure I was up to date. After President Botha's resignation as head of the National Party, F.W. de Klerk had been elected in his place, and there was said to be considerable jockeying between the two men. Some might interpret Botha's willingness to meet me as his way to steal the thunder from his rival, but that did not concern me. I rehearsed the arguments that the state president might make, and the ones I would put in return. In every meeting with an adversary, you must make sure you have conveyed precisely the impression you intend to. I was tense about seeing Mr. Botha. He was known as the Groot Crocodile, the Great Crocodile, and I had heard many accounts of his ferocious temper. He seemed to me to be the very model of the old-fashioned, stiff-necked, stubborn Afrikaner who did not so much discuss matters with black leaders as dictate to them. His recent stroke had apparently only exacerbated this tendency. I resolved that if he acted in that finger-wagging fashion with me, I would have to inform him that I found such behavior unacceptable, and I would then stand up and adjourn the meeting. I'm going to skip forward a little bit in this chapter and go to the page 325, right? And it reads, while the meeting was not a breakthrough in terms of negotiations, it was one in another sense. Mr. Botha had long talked about the need to cross the Rubicon, but he never did it himself until that morning at Twin House. Now I felt there was no turning back. A little more than a month later, in August 1989, P.W. Botha went to national TV to announce his resignation as state president. In a curiously rambling farewell address, he accused cabinet members of a breach of trust, of ignoring him, and of playing into the hands of the African National Congress. The following day, F.W. de Klerk was sworn in as acting president and affirmed his commitments to change and reform. To us, de Klerk was a cipher. When he became head of the National Party, he seemed to be the quintessential party man. Nothing more and nothing less. Nothing in his past seemed to hint at a spirit of reform. As education minister, he had attempted to keep black students out of white universities. But as soon as he took over the National Party, I began to follow him closely. I read all of his speeches, listened to what he said, and began to see that he represented a genuine departure from his predecessor. He was not an ideologue but a pragmatist, a man who saw change as necessary and inevitable. On the day he was sworn in, I wrote him a letter requesting a meeting. In his inaugural address, Mr. de Klerk said his government was committed to peace and that it would negotiate with any other group committed to peace. But his commitment to a new order was demonstrated only after his inauguration, when a march was planned in Cape Town to protest a police brutality. It was to be led by Bishop Tutu and the Reverend Alan Boasak. Under President Botha, the march would have been banned. Marchers would have defied that ban and violence would have resulted. The new president lived up to his promise to ease restriction on political gathering and permitted the march to take place, only asking that the demonstrators remain peaceful. A new and different hand was on the tiller. Okay. Even as de Klerk became president, I continued to meet the secret negotiating committee. We were joined by Gerrit Verjoen, the Minister of Constitutional Development, a brilliant man and with a doctorate in classics, whose role was to bring our discussions into a constitutional framework. I pressed the government to display evidence of its good intentions, urging the state to show its bona fides by releasing my fellow political prisoners at Portsmouth and Robins Island. While I told the committee that my colleagues had to be released unconstitutionally, I said the government could expect disciplined behavior. YouTube thought that I've stopped listening and fell asleep. I'm sorry, YouTube. I told the committee that my colleagues had to be released unconditionally, and I said the government could expect disciplined behavior from them after their release. That was demonstrated by the conduct of Govan Becky, who had been unconstitutionally released at the end of 1987. On October 10, 1989, President de Klerk accounts that Walter Silulu and 7 of my former Robben Island comrades, Raymond Mlabla, Ahmed Katvada, Andrew Malangini, Elias Motualedi, Jeff Masemola, Wilton Makwai, and Oscar Mapeta were to be released. That morning, I had been visited by Walter, Cathy, and Andrew, who was still at Portsmouth, and I was able to say goodbye. I try to find the answers to all the questions they ask. Though I know it's impossible. It was an emotional moment, but I knew I would not be too far behind. The men were released 5 days later from Johannesburg prison. It was an action that rightly evoked praise here and abroad, and I conveyed my appreciation to Mr. de Klerk. But my gratitude paled compared with my unalloyed joy that Walter and the others were free. It was a day we had yearned for and fought for over so many years. De Klerk had lived up to his promise, and the men were released under no bans. They could speak in the name of the ANC. It was clear that the ban on the organization had effectively expired, a vindication of our long struggle and our resolute adherence to principle. De Klerk began a systematic dismantling of many of the building blocks of apartheid. Alright, now on the side of this book right here, you can't really see it like that. I scribbled little notes on the side. I say, dump truck, solo something, dump trucks should also apply to white racism, structural racism, to use to dismantle, white racism. This paragraph right here, it says, de Klerk began a systematic dismantling of many of the building blocks of apartheid. See, minority America can do this with civic activity on a consistent basis. The systematic racism can be dismantled over time. I'm not saying it's going to happen as soon as you go vote this year. That's the problem. You can't just go vote 1 year and expect change and then be done with it. It's a consistent thing. They've had the right to vote for over 300 and some years before we did. Come on. It's a long fighting battle, yeah? You know what I mean? But I digress though. He opened South African beaches to people of all colors and stated that the Reservation of Separate Amnesties Act would soon be repealed. Since 1953, this act had enforced what was known as petty apartheid, segregating parks, theaters, restaurants, buses, libraries, toilets, and other public facilities according to race. In November, he announced that the National Security Management System, a secret structure set up under President Botha to combat anti-apartheid forces, would be dissolved. And at the end of that same chapter, right, Mandela goes on to write, I then brought up the question of my freedom and said that if he expected me to go out to pasture upon my release, he was greatly mistaken. I reaffirmed that if I was released into the same condition under which I had been arrested, I would go back to those things for which I had been in prison. I made the case to him that the best way to move forward was to unban the ANC and all other political organizations, to lift the state of emergency and to release political prisoners and to allow the exiles to return. If the government did not unban the ANC as soon as I was out of prison, I would be working for an illegal organization. Then I said, you must simply rearrest me after I walk through those gates. Again, he listened carefully to what I had said. My suggestion clearly came as no surprise to him. He said he would take all of these things into consideration, but that he would make no promises. That meeting was an exploratory one, and I understood that nothing was going to be resolved that day. But it was extremely useful, for I had taken the measure of Mr. de Klerk, just as I had with my new prison commanders when I was on Robben Island. I was able to write to our people in Lusaka that Mr. de Klerk seemed to represent a true departure from the National Party politicians of the past. Mr. de Klerk, I said, echoing Margaret Thatcher's famous description of Mikhail Gorbachev, was a man we could do business with. And at the bottom of this, Mr. de Klerk I saw that day does not react quickly to things. It was a mark of a man that he listened to what I had to say and did not argue with me. You know, he said, my aim is no different than yours. Your memo to P.W. Botha said the ANC and the government should work together to deal with white fears of black dominance, and the idea of quote group rights is how we propose to deal with it. I was impressed with this response, but said that the idea of group rights did more to increase black fears than allay white ones. De Klerk then said, we will have to change it then. At the end of that paragraph about de Klerk being a man that you could do business with, I wrote, Putin just wanted to disrupt American democracy, for he knows that Obama was more a man you could do business with than you could do business without. Putin feared Obama's intellectual prowess. That's why he knew he couldn't come at America like that. America was not weak when it came to Putin. Trust and believe. Obama was not. Dumb truck is, because all dumb truck got to do is walk over there and kiss the ring, you know. I digress though. On the 2nd of February 1990, F.W. de Klerk stood before Parliament to make the traditional opening speech and did something no other South African head of state had ever done. He truly began to dismantle the apartheid system and lay the groundwork for a democratic South Africa. In dramatic fashion, he announced the lifting of the bans of the ANC, the PAC and the South African Communist Party, and 31 other illegal organizations. The freeing of political prisoners incarcerated for non-violent activities, the suspension of capital punishment, and the lifting of various restrictions imposed by the state of emergency. The time for negotiations has arrived, he said. It was a breathtaking moment, for in one sweeping action, he had virtually normalized the situation in South Africa. Our world had changed overnight. After 40 years of persecution and banishment, the ANC was now a legal organization. I and all of my comrades could no longer be arrested for being a member of the ANC, for carrying its green, yellow, and black banner, for speaking its name. For the first time in almost 30 years, my picture and my words and those of all my band and comrades could appear in South African newspapers. The international community applauded de Klerk's bold actions. Amid all the good news, however, the ANC objected to the fact that de Klerk had not completely lifted the state of emergency or ordered the troops out of the townships. On February the 9th, 7 days after de Klerk's speech opening Parliament, I was informed that I was again going to Turnhouse. I arrived at 6 o'clock in the evening. I met a smiling de Klerk in his office, and as we shook hands, he informed me that he was going to release me from prison the following day. Free him, Mandela. Hey, if you're over 30 years of age and you're African around the world, you remember that song? Free him, Mandela. Sorry, now let me stop. He informed me that he was going to release me from prison the following day. Although the press in South Africa and around the world had been speculating for weeks that my release was imminent, the announcement the announcement nevertheless came as a surprise to me. I had not been told that the reason de Klerk wanted to see me was to tell me that he was making me a free man. I felt a conflict between my blood and my brain. Excuse me. I deeply wanted to leave prison as soon as I could. But to do so on such notice would not be wise. I thanked de Klerk and then said that at the risk of appearing ungrateful, I would prefer to have a week's notice in order that my family and my organization could be prepared for my release. Simply to walk out tomorrow, I said, would cause chaos. I asked de Klerk to release me a week from that day. After waiting 27 years, I could certainly wait another 7 days. De Klerk was taken aback by my response. Instead of replying, he continued to relay the plan for my release. He said that the government will fly me to Johannesburg and officially release me there. Before he went any further, I told him that I strongly objected to that. I wanted to walk out of the gates of Victor Verster and be able to thank those who looked after me and greet the people of Cape Town. Though I was from Johannesburg, Cape Town had been my home for nearly 3 decades. I would make my way back to Johannesburg, but when I choose to, not when the government wanted me to. Once I am free, I said, I will look after myself. De Klerk was again nonplussed, but this time my objections caused a reaction. He excused himself and left his office to consult with others. After 10 minutes, he returned with a rather long face and said, Mr. Mandela, it is too late to change the plans now. I replied that the plan was unacceptable and that I wanted to be released a week henceforth, and at Victor Verster, not Johannesburg. It was a tense moment, and at the time, neither of us saw an irony in a prisoner asking not to be released and his jailer attempting to release him. De Klerk again excused himself and left the room. After 10 minutes, he returned with a compromise. Yes, I could be released at Victor Verster, but no, the release could not be postponed. The government had already informed the foreign press that I was to be set free the next day and felt they could not renege on that statement. I felt I could not argue with that. In the end, we agreed on the compromise, and Mr. De Klerk poured a tumbler of whiskey for each of us to drink in celebration. I raised the glass in a toast, but only pretended to drink. Such spirits are too strong for me. I did not get back to my cottage until shortly before midnight, whereupon I immediately sent word to my colleagues in Cape Town that I was to be released the following morning. I managed to get a message to Winnie and telephone Walter in Johannesburg. They would all fly in on a chartered plane the next day. That evening, a number of ANC people on what was known as the National Reception Committee came to the cottage to draft a statement that I would make the following day. They left in the early hours of the morning, and despite my excitement, I had no trouble falling asleep. Okay. The next chapter is part 11. It's titled Freedom. And it starts at chapter 100. I am truly going to close it out. The last thing you're going to hear me say, and the very last episode of this last part, I'm going to leave this and go to Wakanda Forever and a couple of news articles, and then that's it. You know what I mean? Honest to God, that's it. And then I got 2 hours of the beginning, so I'm sorry, yeah, you know. This is crucial. I'm gonna get back to that because I'm gonna close it out with that. I wanna close it out with that. It is very interesting. Mandela's life was Mandela's life. It was his freedom that day. It was just that day, you know what I mean? But I digress though. Even if Wakanda Forever, I beg you as a youth I want to say these days, please don't judge me, but I've got a confession. I believe that most of the ills that are addressed in this book, the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, can be engaged if not relieved if we read Baldwin and scores of really smart black intellectuals, including Robin D.G. Kelly and Farrah Jasmine Griffin, and if we elect good politicians like Kamala Harris, Andrea Jenkins, Ras Baraka, and Eric Holder, and if we listen to great artists like Jay-Z and Beyonce, and Kendrick and Rhapsody. But, and here's where I beseech your understanding, they might all be solved if we all took a trip to Wakanda. I know, it's cheesy that I'm capitulating to the hype around a blockbuster superhero movie, surrendering the high aesthetic moral ground to a piece of popular entertainment that may sully the intellectual credibility of all the big ideas I've grappled with here. But you couldn't be more wrong. Everything about Black Panther is right, timely, and I dare say, prophetic. Even Black prophecy at its best. A visual witness to the aspirations and ideals we harbor in our black chest when we let our imaginations roam free. But let's be honest, the appeal of Wakanda is also its shame. That in this day, in this age, it should even be necessary for black folks to be so hungry for representation that we flock to the movie theater by the millions to see on screen a fictional version of what our society can provide us every day. A place where race is not an issue and our blackness is taken for granted. That's one of the reasons why an economic back to African movement might work for the black race, because the African will learn so much from the African American, way more than the African American will learn from the African. Trust me. I digress now. But let's be honest, the appeal of Wakanda is also its shame. That in this day, in this age, it should even be necessary for black folks to be so hungry for representation that we flock to the movie theater by the millions to see on screen a fictional version of what our society can provide us every day. I'm sorry, I just realized I gotta close it out with the Pulitzer Prize winner. And what up, Kenya? Sorry, let me stop. A place where race is not an issue and our blackness is taken for granted. Yes, it is true. But it is also grievous that in a world where Martin Luther King has spoken, where Billie Holiday has sung, where James Baldwin has written, where Sidney Poitier has acted, where Muhammad Ali has boxed, where Harriet Tubman has escaped, where George Washington Carver has invented, where Barbara Jordan has politicked, where Julius Harvin has dunked, where Catherine Dunham has danced, where Serena Williams has smashed, where Toni Morrison has created, where Barack Obama has proceeded, that it is still necessary to proclaim our genius or assert our humanity or argue for our beauty, our dignity, our worth, our simple ability to make it through the day without a single policeman using his baton to beat us or his taser to stun us or his gun to shoot us. That was one sentence. Yo, Mike, thanks, brother. That was one sentence. I couldn't have closed it any better, yo. I couldn't have said it any better. I could argue that one sentence, but you being the writer you are. Like I'm just saying, that's what happened. That's why I say read. Because the time somebody puts into formulating and writing and putting things together to make sure it comes off right, with the right cadence. Say that, let me stop, man. Let me stop. We love Wakanda because Wakanda loves us. Wakanda is the name of our paradise and possibility. Wakanda is a place of our unapologetic blackness. A blackness that is beautiful and ugly, that is uplifting and destructive, that is peaceful and violent, that is, in a word, human in all of its glory and grief. With no special pleading for its virtue, no excuse made for its wickedness, except that wickedness exists, and in its existence we find it necessary to address it, to fight it, to remove it, but not to defend ourselves against the belief that it represents all black people. Wakanda is black all over and everywhere, and wherever its blackness exists, there exists. To the indefinite possibilities and any and all options available to the human being. The magic and madness, the belief and cynicism, the positive and negative, all of it there together in one place, not segregated or artificially divided, so we can say, here is what's good about us, and there is what's bad about us, because neither exhausts who we are. We are always perpetually more than what it seems we are. In Wakanda, we finally get the chance to just be, like white folks can and do every day of their lives. Yes, it's true, white folks have a Wakanda too, but its name is different because even though it's chock full of myths and ideals, tales and portions, it actually exists in real time, with real flesh and blood, with real cities and realities attached to it. Its name is democracy. Its name is Iowa or New York. I'm trying to tell y'all, hey, Mike killed it, y'all. And Mike, thank you, sir. Go get Marcellus' book. It's titled Never Shut Up. It comes out on Tuesday the 23rd. It comes out today. It comes out today. This day, it comes out today. You know what I mean? This day that I'm doing this right now, it comes out today. Actually tomorrow, but I'm just trying to say this. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to lie to y'all, you know what I mean? I just had a Trump moment where a lie popped in my head because I'm human, but I figured not lie. I decided not to be like him, you know. Him that should not be named. That's what I'm going to refer to you for the remainder, for the next 54 minutes. Him that should not be named. I'm going to try. If I see his name, I will just say him that should not be named. Lord Voldemort. Let me stop. What's up, JK? Yes, it's true. White folks have a Wakanda too. But its name is different because even though it's chock full of myths, ideals, tales, and portions, it actually exists in real time with real flesh and blood, with real cities and realities attached to it. Its name is democracy. Its name is Iowa or New York. Its name is bread and car and air and speech and school and law and travel and society. In other words, whatever and wherever whiteness exists and is seen as normal and necessary, as usual, as taken for granted, as presumed, as invisible and unaccountable, and therefore not necessary to be named Wakanda. Fantasy ain't needed when reality already provides what fiction aims for. Yeah. This is my second time reading these words, you know what I mean? I read the book already. I had the same yo moment. So yeah, I'm just trying to portray my yo moments so you can feel the same thing when you do with it. If you didn't understand my accent, did you understand it was at a Kabbalah marathon? You know what I mean? In case you're one of those Americans who think that if you don't speak without an accent, you're gonna close your ears to them, I'm sorry, I can't help you there. You know what I mean? I can stick an anvil through one ear, see if it comes out the next. Fantasy ain't needed when the reality already provides what fiction aims for. Wakanda is necessary for us because our black lives are seen as anything but. Wakanda matters because black lives don't. We went to see Black Panther time and again because time and again we had to remind ourselves that the denial of our beauty time and again is not real. That what is real is what we see projected as a fantasy, but which we know in our hearts is our black bodies to be true. We are that great. We are that intelligent. We do love science. It's never been science that scares us. It's been scientists who pervert knowledge to justify our inferiority or our death. Enough of that. This ain't Kansas, Dorothy, and yes, Kansas, at least for Dorothy and millions of others, is a white Wakanda. We do love our skin, our hair, our noses. We love the way the camera loves us in Wakanda, the way it lavishes visual praises on our black allegiance, on our black allegiance. Wakanda exists because what we should have is not here: justice, truth, and love. Wakanda exists because for centuries we have struggled to imagine ourselves as the arbiters of our destiny when we are unfettered by hate and fear. In Wakanda, our battles have to do with the big ideas and truths that all folk confront on their human journey. In Wakanda, there is no second guessing ourselves, our smarts, our looks, our bodies, except for the normal reasons. Except for the normal reasons and insecurities we all possess. We keep going back to see Wakanda because the celebration of our blackness, the pageantry of our blackness, the hipness of our blackness, the rituals and rites and reasons of our blackness, the depth and breadth of our blackness, its winding width, its poignant parameters, its monumental measures are all there for us to see, to take in with all our senses. Wakanda is black love. Wakanda is black brilliance. Wakanda is black blackness. Yo, Mike killed it, eh? Wakanda is black love. Wakanda is black brilliance. Wakanda is black blackness. Not a blackness manufactured by others to satisfy their lust for our coolness, our suave, our earthiness, our grittiness, our sensibilities, our sexiness. It is a blackness that is black enough to be black when it matters most, when no one is looking, when no one is judging, when no one cares more than they should, or less than they ought, when blackness in all of its splendid blackness simply is. Wakanda is so appealing because having to explain ourselves to those who doubt us, doubt our minds, doubt our motives, doubt our goodness, doubt our undoubtable hugeness, doubt our epic and oracular and spectacular blackness, plain wears us out. Wakanda is our weariness rejected and made unnecessary. Wakanda is where microaggressions go to die. Wakanda is a Fannie Lou Hammer holiday where being sick and tired of being sick and tired is retired. Wakanda is a Fannie Lou Hammer holiday where being sick and tired of being sick and tired is retired. We are tired of explaining why it's not cool to touch our hair. We are tired of explaining why our hair looks different than yours. We are tired of explaining why our hair isn't always long and straight. We are tired of explaining why natural hair is a choice we have to combat the belief that the only good hair is white hair. We are tired of explaining why the weaves we wear are modern extensions of our locks, but are extensions too of our fierce desire to style ourselves a new reality. We are tired of telling you that white privilege is real. That's how I decide every black man get, every black woman get when they look at a white person that they don't tell. If you want to see that side explain, look at Whoopi after Trump won, explaining to some white chick on The View about the white lies that was Trump's presidency. We are tired of telling you that white privilege is real. We are tired of telling you that white people get away with shit that black people could never dream of. Hence, Wakanda. We are tired of telling you for the billionth time that no, white people are not the victims of racism more than black or brown people are. We are tired of telling you that affirmative action is something you benefited from for centuries, except it had another name for you. That name is living. We are tired of telling you that our kids are viewed differently than yours in ways far worse than you can imagine. We are tired of telling you that things your kids get reprimanded for, our kids get remanded for. We are tired of telling you that black folks with degrees often don't have the same shot at a job as white folks with criminal convictions. Think about that. We are tired of telling you that doing the same crime as a white person often lands black folks in harder water with longer sentences under far worse conditions. We are tired of telling you that we are not thugs. We are tired of telling you that we are not criminals. Yo, I don't know if I told y'all this already, but I got, like, at my job recently, it was doing the Dre concert. This lady in there with her daughter. I walked in, I got my uniform, I got my badge, I got everything on. Anybody who's walked into any location and shopped in Staples Center since 2016 of November the 2nd, anyone who's walked into any store and have heard an accented voice, say to them, if you need help looking for your size, let me know. Knows I'm just trying to help you. I'm just doing my job, you know what I mean? I'm what you call a people person, even though I don't get why that phrase even exists, because we are humans. We're supposed to be people anyway, but you know, it is what it is. So like, so I walked up, I asked this lady if she need help looking for something. When I say, soon as this lady turned and looked up, because I'm a little taller than her, she said it with her. As soon as they looked up and turned up, yo, the first instinct that this lady had, I noticed it out of my lower peripheral. The first instinct this lady had was to clutch her purse. Man, like, I wasn't shocked, it just hit me back, you know what I mean? She clutched her purse, pressed it down real quick, you know what I mean? So I just said, hey, she shook her head, and I said, well, if you do need any help, don't hesitate to ask, you know what I mean? Give me something to do, you know what I mean? As you can see, I'm quite busy here, but still, give me something to do. I only say that as a joke because when I say that, I'm not really busy. There's nobody in there for me to help, so I'm trying to help somebody. I'm trying to kill time, so, you know, because when you get to work, your objective is to leave work, right? So as soon as you get there, it's almost over, you know. But yeah, it was just funny how that happened, like, you know. I digress. We're tired of telling you that we're not criminals. We're tired of telling you that Trayvon did not deserve to die at the hands of a racist vigilante who killed him because he's a coward, and the most flagrant example of how you protect vicious people and turn their guilt into unconvincing innocence. Wakanda is where Trayvon reigns as a king, as a warrior, most importantly, as a man. Because he made it past a youth that is forever in peril in a culture that doesn't prize our breathing. Wakanda is our insistence that we would choose how to be black. Wakanda is our insistence that we would choose what to be black about. Hint. Everything. Wakanda is our refusal to let others tell us what is important to us, about us, for us. Wakanda is our refusal to anymore pretend that what is happening to us in the real world in real time is really happening. This is the illusion. This notion that oppression is natural, that violence is inevitable, that hate is normal, that whiteness is a birthright, that subordination is good, that evil is a goal, that control is a virtue. This is what is unnatural, false, fake, undesirable, should be banned and banished and banished. Yo, Mike went in, yo. Man, I so wish I could do like a Professor Xavier's liberal cerebral type of thing, you know what I mean, where I can just get in the mind of, where I can just read this into the mind of all black folks, so just come to black folks to just believe that that shit is real, yo. Like, but I told my man early, I know I probably don't call early name like 10 times throughout this whole series. My man early there over there, when I told him that, he said, yeah, that would be a superhero, and that would be a superpower, you know what I mean? You will be voting man, you know what I mean? I'll be like, nah, I'll be Revo man, reading vote. Revo, R-E-V-O, revolution, you know what I mean? You see how R-E-D and the R-E, and vote, V-O-T, and the R-E and the V-O, can spell R-E-V-O-L-U-T-I-O-N, revolution. Revo man, R-E-V-O-M-A-N, so. Vendor by day, convincing people to read and vote before they wake up. My bad, yeah, my bad. I need to stop. Wakanda is our refusal to anymore pretend that what is happening to us in the real world, in real time, is really real. This Black Lives in America is the illusion. This notion that oppression is natural, that violence is inevitable, that hate is normal, that whiteness is a birthright, that subordination is good, that empire is a goal, that control is a virtue. This is what is unnatural, false, fake, undesirable, should be banned and bashed and banished. Wakanda is our told you so, that black films can do well here and abroad, that black superheroes can be loved by black folks and others at the same time, that white folks can watch us just like we watch you when there are no black characters, and yet we still empathize and care and cry and identify with you. Wakanda is what we are when we are done with explanations of our blackness and exalts instead of exclamations of our blackness. It is sad that all of this was inspired by a movie. No. Is it sad that all of this was inspired by a movie? In a way, perhaps. But then works of art has always inspired us to see ourselves in ways that aren't permitted when ruthless and narrow versions of reality pass for truth. From this moment on, let Wakanda be our vibrant affirmation, our joyous amen. You like something black? Wakanda. Our rhythms excite you? Wakanda. Our brains bring you to the edge? Wakanda. Our love can redeem this world? Wakanda. Our hunger for justice can free the rest of the world too? Wakanda. I told y'all, man, yo, black folks who got so much, like, we have had so much change and impact in major events around the world in world history, but that history is not out there though. It's not. They're not gonna, because anything that makes black folks look bad, anything that makes black folks look good, it's a shot, means white supremacy has taken one notch down, even though it's a small notch, you know. That ain't nothing new, you know. Our hunger for world justice, can free the world of the world too, can free the rest of the world too. Wakanda. Wakanda is the Wakanda of today and forever. Wakanda. So yes, it might seem silly or kitschy or needy or downright desperate. Makes no mistake. Makes no difference. Wakanda exists in our minds and souls because our minds and souls have never existed as they should in the minds and souls of those who look on us with contempt or pity or derision or indifference. Wakanda is our pledge to never let any of that determine how we see or love ourselves. Agree? Wakanda forever. That was the end of that. Okay, let's have some fun here. What's this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These are the 10 books I got out of the library that I got returned back. If you're black in America, man, do me a favor, man. Like, even if you listen to portions that I've read of these books, because I did not read I did not complete any of these books on camera. Do me a favor, man. Just like my Mr. Dyson just said, man. Read up on some shit, man. I know you already listen to the music, you know what I mean? You already listen to me, I get it. The Jay-Z's and the Beyonce's and the Kendricks and the Rapsons, I get it. Please read, man. There are old adage that to keep a secret from a black man put in the book. They ain't lie about that. That shit is still fucking true today, man. Like, I see it every day. If you're black and you read in America, tell me you wish more folks like you will be reading, man. You know what I mean? I'm just saying. And about 80% of these books were authored by African Americans. You know what I mean? Fun times. This is from CNN on April the 4th of 2018. The 50th anniversary of when this brother was taken out, you know what I mean? And it was penned by John Blake from CNN.com. And it reads, it's titled "The Question That Haunts Martin Luther King's Last Day in Memphis" by John Blake of CNN on April the 4th of 2018. Okay. And it says, it's April 4th, 1968, and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. steps outside his room at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis and leans over the balcony. King has been in an anxious mood all day, and his room reflects his hurried state of mind. His bed remains unmade, and his suitcase containing his hairbrush, clothes, a can of magic shave, and a copy of his book Strength to Love remains unpacked. As King stands on the balcony, he asks a saxophonist in the courtyard below to play his favorite song, "Take My Hand, Precious Lord," at a rally he's leading later that night. Across the street, a man raises his rifle in the narrow bathroom of a derelict rooming house and points it at King. It is 6:01 p.m. Just as the man squeezes the trigger, King suddenly returns to his room to don his overcoat against the evening chill. The bullet misses King's head by inches and slams into a wall. America's history is full of grim what-if questions. What if President Lincoln's bodyguard had not decided to get a drink and leave Lincoln unguarded that night at Ford's Theater? What if Robert Kennedy had decided not to take a shortcut through the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, where an assassin was waiting for him on the night he was killed? As the nation remembers King's assassination in Memphis 50 years ago, there's another largely unspoken question. What if King had survived? Would he have changed the trajectory of events that shaped a post-1968 America? And how would events have changed him as the country evolved? I asked the questions of some of the people who knew King best. They include a Pulitzer Prize-winning biography whose work reveals some of King's most private inner struggles, scholars who have studied and taught King's life for decades, and a close friend who was with King at the Lorraine Motel and remembers his peculiar mood during his last moments. They cited 4 possible scenarios had King lived. These may seem trivial to consider in light of King's murder, but part of the reason so many people still deeply mourn King a half-century later is not just because of what the war lost, it's the tantalizing possibility of what more it could have gained. Kendrick was right, and he also already won a Pulitzer for that. Hey, I'll be back. Yeah, I'll be drinking too much Arizona. he would have outflanked the Southern strategy. Some commentators talk about a white backlash or white lash that greeted President Obama's election. But the United States was already undergoing a white lash when King was assassinated. Many white Americans in 1968 thought the civil rights movement had gone too far. Segregationist Governor George Wallace of Alabama tapped into their racial sentiment while running for president. He drew huge crowds in the North and won nearly 10 million votes in 1968 general election as a third-party candidate. What Wallace started, Richard Nixon refined. Nixon won the 1968 presidential strategy as a Republican in part by deploying what some historians call the Southern strategy. Yeah, as a Republican, the Republican Party, I told you about it, the Republicans, man. Tell you about the Republican Party, you ain't trying to believe me. No. But Nixon won the 1968 presidential election as a Republican in part by deploying what some historians call the Southern strategy. Claire Weissen, author of A Nation on Fire, America in the Wake of the King assassination, described that strategy in a recent New York Times editorial. Nixon played to the middle by eschewing the overt racism of George Wallace, Weissen wrote, but he deployed a range of more subtle instruments, anti-busing, anti-open housing, to appeal to the tens of millions of white suburbanites who imagine themselves to be racially innocent, yet quietly held many of the same prejudices about the inner city and black radicals that their parents had held about King and other civil rights activists. That backlash rolled on in other ways. There was a violent reaction to busing in places like Boston again, yeah. In the 1970s, the Supreme Court made school integration more difficult with cases like Milliken v. Bradley, a weakened affirmative action program, and weakened affirmative action programs in colleges with Regents of the University of California versus Becky, a case prompted by a white law student who said he was a victim of reverse discrimination. Yeah. The impact of that white backlash lingers. The Republican Party is predominantly white. Public schools in America are even more segregated than they were in the 1960s. And the private lives of millions of Americans remain segregated as well. Most whites don't have any non-white friends. Could King have stopped any of this? Yes, says the Reverend William Barber, the force behind Moral Mondays, an interracial social justice movement formed in North Carolina in 2013. He has revived King's Poor People's Campaign this year with a series of marches and job walkouts. The new campaign is planning on launching 6 weeks of nonviolent civil disobedience on May 13th, Mother's Day. King was killed at the very time that we needed to expose this strategy, Barber said. When he was killed, it almost gave the Southern strategy and the Christian nationalism a path to hijack the public discourse. King would have outflanked the Southern strategy, Barber said, by showing working class white Americans in clear and dramatic ways that they had common causes with all working people. When King was killed, he was forming an interracial army of poor whites, Hispanics, Native Americans, and blacks to camp out on the Mall in Washington and demand that Congress stop funding the Vietnam War and fight poverty instead. He was going to demand a $12 billion economic bill of rights to guarantee jobs for the able-bodied, income to those unable to work, and an end to housing discrimination. Images of King speaking out on behalf of poor white people would have sent a powerful signal to alienated whites who were starting to flock to the Republican Party, Barber said. Who don't want to have the ability to split poor whites? You would not have had the ability to split poor whites and blacks, because the Poor People's Campaign would have brought them together, he says. You wouldn't have gained a Nixon and a Reagan. Man, they had to take that man out, yeah. Don't sleep on the fact that Dr. King was working on some things, yeah. Mama say, mama sa, mama kusa, ooh. We could not have had a Nixon and a Reagan. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? I digress. You would not have gotten 5 more years of Vietnam either, another historian says. King was assassinated exactly 1 year to the day after he delivered a speech opposing the Vietnam War. It was one of the most unpopular decisions he ever made. President Lyndon B. Johnson abandoned him, and many black and white allies denounced him. King's anti-war speech, though, won him new fans in the growing anti-war movement, which was bolstered even more when Robert Kennedy began to oppose the Vietnam War. King could have saved thousands of lives in Vietnam had Kennedy, who was running for president in 1968, also survived. Says Benedict Guillermo, Associate Professor of American Studies at the University of Notre Dame. I think it would have been a quicker end to the Vietnam War with the coalition of MLK and RFK, says Guillermo, who teaches a course called Witnessing the 60s. As we know, from 68 to 73, you had close to 25,000 more deaths in Vietnam. King's anti-war speech was prophetic. The United States gradually turned against the Vietnam War, and today it is seen as a major blunder, and King's Vietnam speech is seen as one of his finest moments. He would have been pushed aside by blacks and whites. Historians get nostalgic about King's Poor People's Campaign, but too many who were involved in his last crusade, for many who were involved in his last crusade, there is little nostalgia. Many were exhausted in 1968, and some of his close allies did not support it. Even his staff people weren't that enthusiastic, said Bernard Lafayette, who was a close friend of King and the national coordinator for the campaign, which was led by the SCLC. The enthusiasm that should have been there was not there, he says. It seems so hopeless. How do you help poor people? The nation is still trying to figure that out. The Poor People campaign ended in June when police closed down a camp that had been set up by the demonstrators near the Lincoln Memorial and arrested those who resisted. Almost everything that happened to the Poor People campaign would have happened even if King had been there, and he would have hurt King's stature tremendously, said Gerald Porter, a history professor at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin, and author of Barnyard Rustin, American Dreamer. He was going to lose the white working class to Nixon and Reagan no matter what. That's true. Porter says. He was assassinated in April, and only 6 months later, Nixon was elected. King's economic message would have been just as controversial in the 1970s as his racial message was in the 1960s, Porter says. King had evolved to become a democratic socialist, much like Bernie Sanders is today, Porter says. He would have pushed for a government-run national health program, a national jobs program, and a guaranteed income for Americans. Maybe that resonates with those who voted for Sanders when he ran for president in 2016, but that kind of economic message would not have gained traction in the 70s and 80s, Porter says. Those years were marked by recessions, cutback in government services, and the rising popularity of a neoliberal economic message that said that the best way to stimulate the economy is not to help the poor, but to cut taxes for the rich, Porter says. Trickle-down economics, motherfucker. King would have been engulfed by the white backlash, Porter says. He was a martyr, so even white conservatives have a different view of him now. But had he lived, they would have been saying some nasty things about him. I mean, they were already saying it, so. They would have called him a socialist, a Marxist, or a communist. Black militants were already calling King's nasty names when he was assassinated. They were dismissing his nonviolence philosophy as naive, too passive. Some of the African American militants, idealists we have today are going to dismiss me, yes, as naive and passive. But I'm not. I'm far from it. If I haven't proven to you that I'm not naive by any stretch of the imagination, I digress though. That would have continued had he survived, some say. Images of non-violent black marchers singing "We Shall Overcome" while getting beaten did not seize the imagination of many blacks anymore. But pictures of Black Panther leader clad in leather jackets while towing guns did. King couldn't stop the rise of black militancy. Yes, he could have. You don't know that. But yes, he could have. I know that. It's like I'm just kidding. But perhaps he could have redirected some of its energy, but too much anger was building, says Guillermo from Notre Dame. King was a voice of reason and moderation, Guillermo said. As he was with King gone, a more militant presence in the civil rights movement provoked more of the backlash than we saw in the affirmative action and busing. You lose that moderate voice, you lose the center. And the center did not hold. He would have teamed up with Mandela. What an image. What an image, yo. Can you imagine Dr. King being there in 1990 when Mandela was getting released from prison? Oh, free Mandela. He would have teamed up with Mandela and taken on He Who Shall Not Be Named. Fast forward to 1990 and imagine this scene. Nelson Mandela had just been released from prison in South Africa. The world is about to get its first glimpse of the anti-apartheid leader in 27 years. As he emerged in the sunlight, leading a procession of supporters, Mandela tossed his right fist into the air in the victory salute. Next to him, a beaming king. His closely cropped hair, now speckled with silver, raised his fist to salute as well as they walked past cheering crowds. This is the post-1968 scenario the Reverend Curtis Paul de Young envisions for King. In his imagining, King's moral appeal is too global to be tarnished by domestic changes in US politics. You're right, Reverend. He is a global leader who would naturally seek out another transcendent figure, Mandela. De Young, CEO of the Minnesota Council of Churches, taught a college course on King and Malcolm X for 25 years. So I would love to take that course. King has spoken out against apartheid, he said. De Young imagines a creative interchange between the two men, with Mandela reinvigorating King's work around racism. King never gave up on the humanity of white people, and Mandela brought that kind of sensitivity to whites in South Africa. De Young says, yo, Reverend, you hit it in the nose. You hit it on the head, yo. You just hit that thing out, that line right there. King never gave up on the humanity of white people, and Mandela brought that kind of sensitivity to whites in South Africa. Yo, if I can achieve 2% of what these two great men understood, 90% of my job is done. Thank you, world. He really believed that whites could be redeemed and reconciled. He had converted enough of his jailers while he was in prison. Had King lived through the 1990s and beyond, how would he have responded to other social justice issues of the time, such as women's rights and gay rights? For starters, De Young says King, who often said injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, would have been forced to re-examine his own private behaviors, because he was a man, an open-minded mind. King had extramarital affairs, a secret that was revealed to FBI surveillance. If he saw gender as a social justice, it might have changed his view of women and therefore his extramarital behavior, De Young said. He would have to critique his own extramarital affair from a justice perspective. King acted like many traditional black pastors of his time. He grew up in a hyper-masculine, patriarchal black church where women were treated as subservient. He reflected some of that standoffish attitude towards assertive women in his treatment of Ella Baker, a legendary civil rights organizer. Yet on LGBTQ issues, he acted like a man ahead of his time. He rejected repeated calls to disavow Bayard Rustin, a close aide of his who was gay. Something King's wife, who became a champion of gay rights, would have further cultivated that part of King. She understood the movement for sexual and gender equality was a civil rights movement, said Vincent Stevens, director of the Popel Shaw Center for Race and Ethnicity at Dickinson College in Pennsylvania. Had he lived, she would have been able to play a positive role to helping broaden that conversation. Fast forward today and imagine King in the era of President Dump Truck. This scenario is not hard to conjure. Some of King's closest friends and aides, Representative John Lewis, Andrew Young, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, are still in the public eye and weigh in on current events. He would probably do quite well on Twitter because of his ability to express himself in a few words and write things that people could remember. Hey, you could literally pick up King's while we can't wait right now and crash Twitter with likes with the amount of shit you could get out of this. If you thought Obama could talk, can you imagine Dr. King alive when Obama was president, and that made and what he would have gotten to that? Things we cannot control. Things we cannot control. You can control when you vote and how you vote, though. Yes, you can. You know what I mean? Things you cannot control. He would probably do quite well on Twitter because of his ability to express himself in a few words and write things that people could remember, says Portier, the Lawrence University historian. He who shall not be named would have given him a nickname. Yes, he would have. On the other hand, Portier says maybe King wouldn't take to Twitter. His lofty pronouncements might not play well in a world full of snark and juvenile memes. Yeah, that's true too. The Twitterverse is such a cesspool that he might say, I don't even want to get involved. Hey man, welcome to my mind, Portier says. There is one public battle King would not be able to resist joining, critiquing the white evangelicals who support dump truck. Portier envisioned a contemporary letter from Birmingham jail bristling with references to scripture and irrefutable logic. Try to tell you, man. He will be hitting them where they live, Portier says. They can always dismiss others by saying they don't understand us. What King could do is say, I come from the same place as you do. I can recite the Bible right along with you. I grew up in the church and I'm telling you, you're on the wrong path. They couldn't turn their back on him. I'm trying to tell you. He would have become an elder statesman. King could have turned his back on public life, but he may not have had the choice to step aside. He could have been forced aside by health problems or even scandal. Some of King's closest friends would have, quote, staged an intervention and forced King to step away from his public roles, said David Garrow, author of the Pulitzer Prize winning biography of King, Bearing the Cross. The same guy who wrote that big ass Obama book right there. David Garrow. By 1968, King is so exhausted and so drained physically and mentally that he's on an emotional edge that he's never been before. During his last days in Memphis, King told an aide that he had a migraine headache for 3 days because of divisions within the civil rights movement. And sometimes I feel like turning around, just quitting, or maybe becoming president of Morehouse College, according to Voice of Freedom and Oral History of the Movement. Garrow said he can imagine King retiring and become an elder statesman in American public life. Yeah, I'm gonna leave that one at that, man. I'm gonna leave that one at that, cause yeah, I can't really say too much about what King could have done or wouldn't have done, cause you know, that's just wishful thinking, you know what I mean? But all I know is he was killed 50 years ago of what he could have potentially done because he was an educated black man. Before I close out with Nelson Mandela, let me get to This was from July the 3rd of 2018. And it was on CNBC.com. It's under the politics section, obviously. And it's titled, it was written by Tucker Higgins. It is titled, Trump withdraws Obama-era guidelines on considering race in college admissions. Key points. President Donald Trump withdrew policy guidelines that encourages the consideration of race in college admissions. The guidelines encourage colleges to voluntarily promote diversity and, quote, avoid racial isolation in their admission practices. The Trump Justice Department has already withdrawn 2 policy documents related to college enforcement of Title IX, a gender discrimination statute. The Trump administration on Tuesday withdrew Obama-era policy guidelines that encourage the consideration of race in college admissions. The guidelines encourage colleges to voluntarily promote diversity and avoid racial segregation in their admission processes. They were issued to provide guidance on the administration's interpretation of a number of Supreme Court cases related to affirmative action. The dump truck administration signaled the rules could be on the chopping block a year ago when it began searching for lawyers who were interested in investigating intentional race-based discrimination on college campuses. What was her name? That Texas chick, Becky, what's her name? Damn. Affirmative Action Becky. What's her name? What the hell is this white girl name, yo? Abby Fisher. Abby with the good grades. What the hell was her name? Yeah, now we don't forget about her. We got a racist president in the office. She ain't got to worry about talking shit no more. You know what I mean? These white bigots are happy as fuck. But I digress though. Administration lawyers are investigating a 2015 complaint alleging that Harvard University discriminates against Asian Americans in its admission practices. The Supreme Court has determined what affirmative action policies are constitutional, and the court's written decisions are the best guide for navigating this complex issue. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos said in a statement, "Schools should continue to offer equal opportunities for all students while abiding by the law."
The governing factor on this movement is the speed and the quality of the movement. So we want to, once again, make sure we have good, clean hip hinge mechanics and that nice hip snap at the top, squeezing the glutes and getting as tall as possible. I'm going to tell everyone what you are!
Reversing the Obama-era guidelines will be the latest move by the Trump administration to reshape higher education policy. In February 2017, a month after being in office, less than a month, the Justice Department withdrew 2 policy documents related to college enforcement of Title IX, a gender discrimination statute. Withdrawing the guidelines would add new energy to the debate over affirmative action policies, which the Supreme Court has for decades found constitutional as long as they are paired with certain restrictions regarding the importance of race in admission decisions and the impact on white students. The Supreme Court first took up the issue in 1978 case California versus Bakke, which found that considering race in college admissions could be constitutional if it was one of a number of factors and not the deciding factor by itself. In 2003, the court held a 5-4 decision in Gotha versus Bollinger that the University of Michigan Law School had a compelling interest in ensuring a diverse population of students. However, the court held in Gratz versus Bollinger the same year that any affirmative action policy must be narrowly tailored in a way that does not automatically grant admission to minority applicants in a way that would harm white applicants. In 2016, The court held that affirmative action was constitutional in Fisher. Yeah, that was her name, Abby Fisher. There you go. Becky with the good grades. Was that at the meme? I don't even remember. Fisher versus University of Texas at Austin. Though Judge Anthony Kennedy, who wrote the opinion, noted that the policy could be required to change to, quote, regular evaluation of data and consideration of student experience. Kennedy wrote that Texas, quote, must tailor its approach in light of changing circumstances, ensuring that race plays no greater role than is necessary to meet its compelling interests. Kennedy announced his retirement from the court last week. Dump Truck said he would name Kennedy's replacement from a list of 25 conservative judges compiled by the White House. Y'all know who replaced Kennedy. Cover now, motherfucker. Boy, cover now, motherfucker. Sorry, let me stop, yo. Let me leave my man Brett alone. He's a Supreme Court judge now. You know, he's there for life. He good, he's set for life, you know what I mean? More white wealth being created. I digress though. This is titled it is on sports.vice.com. It came out on March the 31st of 2016. It's by Kevin Trahan. Okay. And it is titled, "The NCAA can afford to pay players with its March Madness Mega Millions. Here's how." Ooh, speaking of Mega Millions, that sucker is at $1.6 billion. Billion with a 1.6 billion dollars, yeah. Man, y'all better go get that. Every year, March Madness makes hundreds of millions of dollars for the NCAA, and every year they explain why the players don't get any of it. It's bullshit. Now, we're not talking about football now. We're not talking about football. We just talk about the basketball aspects, you know what I mean? As we know, the football makes a lot more money. They play less games, but they make a lot more money. It's football now. Bigger arenas, more expensive beer, you know what I mean? You know, so. And it starts. This weekend's Final Four marks the culmination of the biggest money-making event of the year for the NCAA. The association doesn't run college football's postseason, though that is also a gigantic moneymaker for its schools, which means March Madness is its crown jewel. Oh, FBS runs the college football playoffs. Okay, I get that now. Okay, the NCAA. Okay, I hadn't know that. I hadn't realized that. Okay. How much money are we talking about? More money than any other amateur sports league could ever dream of. The latest data we have is from 2014 fiscal year, when the NCAA made $908 million in revenue. Approximately $700 million of that came from television revenues and media rights fees that are almost entirely tied to the NCAA tournament. That makes March Madness the most valuable American sporting event besides the Super Bowl. Of course, almost none of that money goes to the players, who incidentally makes the whole thing possible. The NCAA likes to claim, among other things, that it's just too complicated to pay players. Not quite. There are plenty of ways to divvy up the association's match windfall with its uncut labor force, and none of them are particularly complex. Here's a few. Number one, split the revenue 50-50 just for NCAA tournament participants. Players are not going to get all the money the NCAA tournament generates, and there is no real arguments they should. Ain't nobody saying that. Both the athletes and their schools generate value. Both the athletes and their schools generate value, as is the case in the NFL and the NBA. Fans tune in to see the elite athletes perform at an elite level for elite programs. The name on the front of the jersey matters, so does the name on the back. In the NFL, players receive 55% of television revenues. Let's assume college players receive 50%. That means there would be a pot of $350 million to split among the players on the 68 teams. In the socialist utopia of college sports, teams love revenue sharing. So let's also assume that every individual player will make the same amount. You know what that comes out to? $395,000 per player. And that's only half of the money now. That's only half of the profit that they're splitting. You know what I mean? Holy shit, that is a ton of money. Like life-changing money. Only I already know what you're thinking. I am uncomfortable with players making that much money because as a capitalist, as an American, I think that making money is wrong. Plus, somewhere somebody might buy a tattoo. What are the other options? Glad you asked. Because you could also, this is option number 2, split the revenue 50-50 for every Division I basketball player. This is a more likely scenario because nobody is going to want to have that big of a disparity in payments between players who make the NCAA money and those who don't. Professional leagues split TV money evenly between the best and worst teams. But even when you dividing 50% of the TV revenue among every scholarship Division I basketball player, 13 players each at 351 schools, it still works out to $76,000 per player, which again is pretty damn solid and a lot better than the current $0 per player. You guys know that even $75,000 per player, about 80% of those players who are African American, their parents probably don't even make that much money in a year. Some of them parents make more than, I'm just saying, most of them parents don't. But wait, I'm uncomfortable with schools having any less money. Is there a surplus to pay the athletes with? There is. Even if the NCAA was correct in continually claiming that it and its schools will go broke if they don't continue to operate exactly the way that they do now, and don't worry, because that's a bogus argument. The association can still afford to pay college basketball players a substantial amount. How? Well, the association has $80.5 million surplus in the 2014 fiscal year, $20 million higher than its 2013 surplus. In 2015, the NCAA reported a $9 million loss, a number the non-profits association attributed to increased distribution to schools, $20 million. Associated costs, $3 million. And a tanking stock market, the rest more or less. But the NCAA has also had a $108 million association-wide operating reserve and a $363 million endowment fund in the same year, which means it's not exactly cash poor. So let's say the NCAA divvy up the 2014 surplus among every Division I basketball player. Hardly a fair model and one that no union will ever support. Players would have seen $17,000 per person, almost as much as the proposed $20,000 to $25,000 for a full college career trust fund payment in the O'Bannon case, which incidentally the NCAA spent millions successfully fighting to overturn. What about just having the schools pay the athletes? The NCAA already gives out over $500 million to schools each year, though none of that goes directly to athletes' pockets. So why not just let individual schools decide how much to pay their laborers, because that's what the students are. That's basically how it works in every other free market system. The NCAA maintains that only a few schools actually make a profit, but that's basically an accounting trick because as non-profit athletic departments are not being pressured by owners or shareholders to turn a profit, combine that with labor costs that are fixed at below market rate, and those same athletic departments have plenty of money to spend on spend the money on things they don't actually need, like millions of dollars in bonuses for coaches whose athletes get good grades in weight rooms with waterfalls. Here is how much money each Final Four team's athletic department made this year. Oklahoma, $129 million. Syracuse, $87 million. North Carolina, $83 million. Villanova, $37 million. With that kind of money, all four of these schools, which will have varying levels of payments commitments in other sports based on their priorities and preferences, could pay their basketball players handsomely. And the schools that wanted to win games and get to Final Four and get to future Final Fours will do just that. Because elite basketball talent has plenty of values. Fans love to watch, and advertisers love to pay for those captive eyeballs. Look, none of this is particularly complicated. Only amateurism makes it fuzzy. And two things are clear. One is that there is far too much money slouching around here to say the players should not get any of it. The other is that no matter how you slice the pie, the NCAA and its schools can easily afford to give athletes a larger piece. The US flag up there was upside down for some time to signify the distress call that America has been calling out on in this entire presidency of this dumbass, you know what I mean? So yeah, at the end of that NCAA article I had, let's close it out. Let's close it out. Let's close it out. Let's close it out. Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, Volume 2, Chapter 100, page 339. I awoke on the day of my release only after a few hours sleep at 4:30 a.m. 11 November was a cloudless end of summer Cape Town day. I did a shortened version of my usual exercise regimen, washed and ate breakfast. I then telephoned a number of people from the ANC and the UDF in Cape Town to come to the college to prepare for my release and work on my speech. The prison doctor came by to give me a brief checkup. I did not dwell on the prospects of my release, but on all of the many things I had to do before then. As so often happens in life, the momentousness of an occasion is lost in the welter of 1,000 details. There were numerous matters that had to be discussed and resolved with very little time to do so. A number of comrades from the reception committee included several Cyril Ramaphosa and Trevor Manuel were at the house bright and early. I wanted initially to address the people of Paarl, who had been very kind to me during my incarceration, but the reception committee was adamant that it would not be a good idea. It would look curious if I gave my first speech to a prosperous white burghers of Paarl. Instead, as planned, I would speak first to the people of Cape Town at the Grand Parade in Cape Town. One of the first questions to be resolved was where I would spend my first night of freedom. My inclination was to spend the night in the camp in the Cape Flats, the bustling black and colored townships of Cape Town, in order to show my solidarity with the people. But my colleagues and later my wife argued that for security reasons I should stay with Archbishop Desmond Tutu in Bishop's Court, a plush residence in a white suburb It was not an area where I would have been permitted to live before I went to prison, and I thought it would send the wrong signal to spend my first nights of freedom in a posh white area. But the committee explained that Bishop's Court had become multiracial under Tutu's tenure and symbolized an open, generous non-racialism. The prison service supplied me with boxes and crates for packing. During my first 20 or so years in prison, I accumulated a few possessions, but in the last few years I have amassed enough property, mainly books and papers, to make up for previous decades. I filled over a dozen crates and boxes. My actual VM, but Winnie and Walter and other passengers from the chartered flight from Johannesburg did not arrive until after 2. There were already dozens of people at the house, and the entire scene took on the aspects of a celebration. Warrant Officer Swartz prepared a final meal for all of us, and I thank him not only for the food he had provided for the last 2 years, but also the companionship. Warrant Officer James Gregory was also there at the house, and I embraced him warmly. In the years that he had looked after me from Portsmouth to Victor Versa, we had never discussed politics, but our bond was an unspoken one, and I will miss his soothing presence. Men like Swartz, Gregory, and Warrant Officer Brand reinforced my belief in the essential humanity, even of those who had kept me behind bars for the previous 27.5 years. There was little time for lengthy farewells. The plan was that Winnie and I would be driven in a car to the front gate of the prison, and I had told the authorities that I wanted to be able to say goodbye to the guards and warders who had looked after me, and asked that they and their family wait for me at the front gates, where I would be able to thank them individually. At a few moments after 3, I was telephoned by a well-known SABC presenter who requested that I get out of the car a few hundred feet before the gate so that they could film me walking towards freedom. This seemed reasonable, and I agreed. This was my first inkling that things might not go as smoothly as I had imagined. By 3:30, I began to get restless as we were already behind schedule. I told the members of the reception committee that my people had been waiting for me for 27 years, and I did not want to keep them waiting any longer. Shortly before 4 o'clock, we left in a small motorcade from the cottage. About a quarter of a mile in front of the gate, the car slowed to a stop, and Winnie and I got out and began to walk towards the prison gate. At first, I could not really make out what was going on in front of us, but when I was within 150 feet or so, I saw a tremendous commotion and a great crowd of people. Hundreds of photographers and television cameras and newspaper, as well as several thousand well-wishers. I was astounded and a little bit alarmed. I had truly not expected such a scene. At most, I had imagined there would be several dozen people, mainly the warders and their families, but this proved to be only the beginning. I realized we had not thoroughly prepared for all that was about to happen. Within 20... I'm sorry, I'm tired. Within 20 feet or so of the gate, the camera started clicking, a noise that sounded like some great herd of metallic beasts. Reporters started shouting questions. Television crews began crowding in. ANC supporters were yelling and cheering. It was a happy, if slightly disorienting chaos. When a television crew thrust a long, dark and furry object at me, I recall slightly wondering if it were some newfangled weapon developed while I was in prison. Winnie informed me that it was a microphone. When I was among the crowd, I raised my right fist and there was a roar. I had not been able to do that for 27 years, and it gave me a surge of strength and joy. We stayed among the crowd for only a few moments before jumping back into the car for the drive to Cape Town. Although I was pleased to have such a reception, I was greatly vexed by the fact that I did not have a chance to say goodbye to the prison staff. As I walked through those gates to enter a car on the other side, I felt, even at the age of 71, that my life was beginning anew. My 10,000 days of imprisonment was at last over. 10,000 days is a lot. That is a lot. That is a lot. Alright, so I'm going to fast forward here a bit. Let's go. It was almost dusk when I was led up to the top floor of this stately building whose hall had always been filled with shuffling white functionaries. I walked out on the balcony and saw a boundless sea of people cheering, holding flags and banners, clapping and laughing. I raised my fist to the crowd, and the crowd responded with an enormous cheers. Those cheers fired me anew with the spirits of the struggle. Amandla, I called out. Nyang Wutu, they responded. Ayafrika, I yelled. Mayibuye, they responded. Finally, when the crowd had started to settle down, I took out my speech and then reached into my breast pocket for my glasses. They were not there. I had left them at Victor Versa. I knew Winnie's glasses had a similar prescription, and I borrowed hers. Friends, comrades, and fellow South Africans, I greet you all in the name of peace, democracy, and freedom for all. I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. Your tireless and heroic sacrifices have made it possible for me to be here today. I therefore place the remaining years of my life in your hands. I spoke from the heart. I wanted first of all to tell the people that I was not a messiah, but an ordinary man who had become a leader because of extraordinary circumstances. I wanted immediately to thank the people all over the world who had campaigned for my release. I thanked the people of Cape Town, and I saluted Oliver Tambo and the African National Congress, Umkhonto weSizwe, the South African Communist Party, the UDF, the South African Youth Congress, COSATU, the Mass Democratic Movement, and the National Union of South African Students, and the Black Sash, a group formed by women that had long been a voice of conscience. I also publicly exclaimed my gratitude to my wife and family, saying, I am convinced that their pain and suffering was far greater than my own. I told the crowd in no uncertain terms that apartheid had no future in South Africa, and that the people must not scale down their campaign of mass action. The sight of freedom looming on the horizon should encourage us to redouble our efforts. And I wrote, like, so at the bottom of this, I'm like, I'm gonna ask Oprah, Miss Winfrey, you say, ask Oprah if she had conjured up this when she said at the, was it the Grammys, so the Emmys, or was it the, I can't remember which award it was, but when she conjured up the line, "You there on the horizon," you know what I mean? And I know Oprah got Mandela on the mind all the time. Oprah knows this stuff by heart. This stuff is in her head, you know what I mean? Oprah probably read this book when it came out, then she probably got signed copies of it from Mandela, you know what I mean? Like, she probably had Mandela over one day, like, man, she brought out all her copies of all these books. She said, I want you to sign all of them, Nelson. And he probably looked at her like, okay, man, come on. Let me stop. I felt it was important publicly to explain my talks with the government. Today I said I wish to report to you that my talks with the government have been aimed at normalizing the political situation in the country. I wish to stress that I myself at no time entered into negotiations about the future of our country except to insist on a meeting between the ANC and the government. I said I hope that a climate conducive to a negotiation settlement could soon be achieved, ending the need for the armed struggle. The steps to achieving such a climate, I said, had been outlined in the ANC's 1989 Harare Declaration. As a condition to real negotiation, I said the government must immediately end the state of emergency and free all political prisoners. I told the people that de Klerk had gone further than any other nationalist president leader to normalize the situation, and then, in words that came back to haunt me, I called Mr. de Klerk a man of integrity. Those words were flung back at me many times when Mr. de Klerk seemed not to live up to them. It was vital for me to show my people and the government that I was unbroken and unbowed, and that the struggle was not over for me, but beginning and new in a different form. I affirmed that I was a loyal and disciplined member of the African National Congress. I encouraged the people to return to the barricades to intensify the struggle, and we will walk the last mile together. It was evening by the time my speech was finished, and we were hustled back into our cars for the trip to Bishop Court. As we entered its pristine environs, I saw hundreds of black faces waiting to greet me. This is the only part that Fox News is gonna want to keep showing, where I ain't got Obama's face right there. It's okay. It's going back up there. Before I finish Mandela's words, I just wanted to read this article that, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? To read this article. That's all, you know what I mean? Hey, white supremacy. Bye, Felicia's supremacy. It was from February the 18th of 2018 of this year. It was on a Sunday, and it is titled, Why We Need a Consoler in Chief, by David Litt. It used to be an American ritual like the State of the Union address, only grimmer and far more frequent. Shots will ring out at a movie theater, a nightclub, a church, a school. Bodies will be counted, and then, not too long after, President Obama will speak. Sometimes he will cry. Although I served as a White House speechwriter from 2011 to 2016, I never crafted one of those somber speeches. The president worked on them with the most senior members of his team in the West Wing. I was in the executive office building across the street, but as I watched successive drafts appear in my inbox, I saw how much effort went into them. The reams of research, sometimes done in mere hours, that gave the president the chance to say something personal about each victim. The diligent search for the piece of scripture that could express grief, faith, and resilience all at once. Above all, how to grapple with the reality unique to the United States. This has happened so often before, it would happen so often again. I was lucky to work with and for extraordinary writers on behalf of an extraordinary speaker. Some of Obama's most moving speeches were delivered as consoler-in-chief. But in low, doubting moments, I wondered whether those remarks were necessary or even helpful. Why should the president insist on speaking clearly, forcefully, and without hesitation when Congress refuses to act? Now I think I know the answer. President Dump Trunk certainly cannot be accused of paying too much attention to mass shootings, and yet they continue at an outdoor concert, an airport, a church, a school. Each time, this president's first instinct has been to respond with what can be best described as an aggressive silence. After 17 students and teachers were killed at a Florida high school on Wednesday, the White House canceled the daily press briefing, and hashtag real Donald Trump tweeted condolences in a rote style that sounded suspiciously like that of his staff. His follow-up tweet, a more personal one, had absolutely nothing to say about the dead and the injured. Thursday morning, after it became clear that silence was politically unsustainable, Trump finally delivered a statement on the shooting. I was about to say Trump finally developed a conscience. Those were my thoughts spilling into what I was reading. I'm sorry, yeah. can't help it. TRPTSD, yeah. Ooh, sir. Sorry, now let me stop. Thursday morning, after it became clear that silence was politically unsustainable, Trump finally delivered a statement on the shooting. His rhetoric was perfectly fine. Still, I couldn't help but recall a time when it didn't take a brewing pre-PR crisis to motivate the president to address the public. And as I remembered my previous skepticism, I found myself missing a genuine consoler-in-chief. Keep in mind that Trump is capable of immediate empathy, or at least of displaying it. When an American citizen is killed by an undocumented immigrant or Muslim commits an act of terrorism, Trump needs no pardon to stand in solidarity with victims. Nor should he. That's part of a president's job. But Trump's empathy is selective. If an American family's heartbreak doesn't dovetail with his political agenda or threaten his approval ratings, he doesn't appear to feel their pain. This behavior isn't just careless, it's dangerous. The commander-in-chief is responsible for protecting all of us, regardless of background. In Trump's accounting, whose lives matter? Whose deaths warrant grief? To a terrifying degree, the answers seem to be driven by politics. Just consider his response to a hurricane in Puerto Rico, or the parents of a Muslim soldier killed in Iraq, or the widow of an African-American soldier killed in Niger. Perhaps following the example of the National Rifle Association, a strong supporter in the Republican primaries, Trump at first ignored Wednesday's shooting and hoped the story will go away. And yet, even this description may be too charitable. As a candidate, Trump promised that he alone could fix what ailed the country. In his inaugural address, he promised that American carnage, quote, I swear that man did not know what that word meant. I bet he thought that was American garbage. He was trying to get something from McDonald's that day when he was, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm gonna leave him alone. In his inaugural address, he promised that American carnage will end. The president's attitude on Wednesday sent a different message. These problems are unsolvable. There's nothing to be done. What the president implies, his allies plainly state. Republican Senator Marco Rubio of Florida tweeted that Wednesday was that terrible day you prayed never come. Marco, shut up. You're a sellout, yo. You're a sellout like shit. Like, they should take your Latino card back. You're a fucking sellout. This man looked at you in the face and told you got little hands, and according to him, that signifies you got a little pee-pee. That's why he calls you Little Marco. And you still gonna support this racist, bigoted idiot? Get the fuck out of here, Marco. You're one of those wastes of human breaths. Join Trump on your way the fuck to hell while kissing my light-skinned African ass. I'm sorry. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida tweeted that Wednesday was, quote, that terrible day you pray never comes, as if school shootings were acts of God rather than the inevitable outcome of freely available military-style guns. Evil is sadly always present, opined Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, as if America's uniquely sky-high rate of gun violence is a product of an incurable moral disease. The Republican Party is weaponizing helplessness, and not just around guns. In the worldview of the modern GOP, American leadership cannot stop climate change. Raising the minimum wage cannot help workers. Investing in universal pre-K cannot give young people a shot at a better life. It's hopeless, but this sense of hopelessness isn't born of despair. It's born of a desire to loot the treasury on behalf of the wealthy, slash the social safety net, jeopardize our children's future, and still be able to sleep at night. After all, if we can fix our problems together, greed isn't selfish, it's smart. Which brings me back to a president and a podium and a time when the words that define the White House were, yes, we can. For Obama, consoling the nation was not just about feeling pain. It was about taking responsibility. We bear responsibility for every child, he said after Sandy Hook. The victims are our children. Gun violence is our problem. And while we're fighting, we're not helpless or hopeless. That's the kind of message we have to fight to expect from our presidents. We also have the right to expect their actions to match their word. So that's probably too much to expect from Dump Truck, but if we refuse to follow his example, if we take responsibility where he shirks it, if we confront our challenges where he hides from them, if we speak up where he stays silent, then slowly but surely things will change. We can replace leaders whose first instinct is to ignore mass shootings with leaders whose first instinct is to address them. And then one day, maybe, they won't have to. David Litt is the author of Thanks Obama, My Hopi Changing White House Year, and a former speechwriter for President Obama. I'm gonna put this back up. I'm not done with it yet. I knew I was gonna read this before I finished with Mandela. So, Fox News, y'all can see me off now. Barack is going back up on the wall, yeah. Hey, so yo, Tony, I apologize, I'm sorry for all the walls in the hole, man. You know what I mean? I hope the security deposit will cover it, but it was a small price to pay for doing what I'm doing here, Tony. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, bro. You know, we're right here, man. You know what I mean? I know you probably busting out laughing right now. Hey, God bless, bro. We're right here. Wakanda forever, right? Is it Wakanda forever or is it Wakanda forever? I don't know, man, but hey, my bad. I digress. Let's go. It was evening by the time my speech was finished, and we were hustled back into our cars for the trip to Bishop Court. As we entered its pristine environs, I saw hundreds of black faces waiting to greet me. When they saw us, the people burst into song. When I greeted Archbishop Tutu, I enveloped him in a great hug. Here was a man who had inspired an entire nation with his words and his courage, who had revived the people's hope during the darkest of times. We were led inside the house where more family and friends met us, but for me, the most wonderful moment was when I was told that I had a phone call from Stockholm. I knew immediately who he was. Oliver Tambo's voice was weak but unmistakable, and to hear him after all these years filled me with great joy. Oliver was in Sweden to recuperate from a debilitating stroke he had suffered in August 1989. We agreed to meet as soon as possible. My dream upon leaving prison was to take a leisurely drive down to the Transky and visit my birthplace, the hills and streams where I had played as a boy, and the burial ground of my mother which I had never seen. But my dream had to be deferred, for I learned very quickly of the extensive plans that the ANC had for me, and none of them involved a relaxing journey to the Transky. I was scheduled to hold a press conference that afternoon after my release, and in the morning I met a number of my colleagues to talk about scheduling and strategy. A small mountain of telegrams. If you know what a telegram is, yeah, you're really young, but I'm sorry, but there you go. hopefully Dr. Victoria Sweet will be able to diagnose why I'm getting all these hiccups and all this little thing. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. I know I have bad habits, cigarettes, you know, maybe ganja. I digress. So. A small mountain of telegrams and messages of congratulations had arrived. I tried to review as many of these as possible. They came from all over the world, from presidents and prime ministers, but I remember one in particular from a white Cape Town housewife that amused me greatly. It read, "I am very glad that you are free and that you are back among your friends and family, but your speech yesterday was quite boring.